Every one of us carries two stories about our lives. One where everything went wrong and people hurt us, and another told without judgment where everything simply happened. Peace isn't found in having a perfect life. Peace is found in choosing a gentler story. Hi, my name is Fery, and welcome to Healing Journey with Perry Cho. This podcast is a space for real, honest healing stories, my own and those shared by ordinary people. Stories that may awaken something within you and remind you that your journey matters. Thank you for being here. Hi, welcome to the podcast Healing Journey with Perry Cho. And so today I am going to talking about a topic about racism and ancestral healing. So you probably wonder why these two will combine together. And also I was actually quite hesitant to talking this topic because it's quite sensitive. But I do decide to really recording this experiences as well because it's not for the hatred, or it just really bring the awareness. And also I will explain why the racism is really associated with ancestral healing as well. So that's something I want to talk about. And also the reason why I really want to share this as well. It was recently I was playing a harmonium and there was a chant and I was playing that medicine song, that mantra, and I suddenly, while I was playing, I felt there's a tremendous grief and coming through me, and I couldn't stop crying. I can feel, the ancestral pain and stuff like that. And then I post a social media post and just expressing how I felt about the ancestral trauma we have felt. And I probably used white people and this term, and then triggered a lot of people. And I was like why people will get affected by this. And also there's something I really want to talk about today is that as an Asian, right, as a Chinese living in New Zealand, living in a Western country, and the racism I've been experienced is not just a subtle, obvious way. And also I want to set a tone for this podcast as well. So the reason why I'm sharing these experiences is not because I want to shame another race, or I want to blame another race, or I want to being a victim story. I just want to, because I think everybody, if you're going through racism yourself, you will know as a group, and you will know how that felt. And there's a sensitive point. Even sometimes I think we might have some sort of overreacting component to it, but it is just bring awareness, because the unconscious bias does exist, right? Even though most people nowadays are educated, are aware, but we do have a lot of people is not aware, right? So I think that's the reason why I really want to share honest experiences here, and also bring awareness to people. When you live in a privilege, for example, you're choosing a white race, but basically your whole life living in a privilege, you will never understand people who in the minority, what they're going through, right? It doesn't mean people living in the privilege and they shouldn't live a better life or anything like that. It just bring awareness of, the other party, maybe people who in the minority might going through some really tough time. And then you might be more aware when you approach, when you say something, might really expose them to really big trauma in a lot of way, right? So I feel that's just kind of the intention behind all of this. And if I'm using white people or white culture, and that's just the way I want to describing it, but doesn't mean every white people or white culture is the same, right? So it's not individualism. It's just a general term I could put into place. So I think that's just one thing I want to mention, because there's kind of unnecessary drama happen when I say this. And sometimes the point is not about like against, right? And also it was interesting in that post, right? So I have not friend, someone I know in Facebook, and she's a white, obviously, and then she basically like the whole point of that post expressing sort of like the ancestral trauma and what we experiencing as a Chinese, as this race experiences the colonization and the war and all that kind of stuff, right? And then like you basically is the feeling sense of it. It's nothing about the hatred of a race. And then her response will be, oh, Western culture also did a lot of good things, and Western people also did a lot of good things as well. And I think that's a point when, for example, I remember one time I watched the news and when the Black Life doing the protest, right? And people say Black Life Matters. And some people will say, hey, all life matters. And from the sounds of it, it's nothing wrong with it. And we're talking about we are all one, we're all, but as a specific race who going through racism, discrimination, and when you say all life matters, you're basically devalidating the experiences they had, right? So I think that's the reason why when I purely just expressing the feeling sense of it, maybe I have a generalization like terms of it, and then it become like an attack in their lens, right? So, and I was like, no, this is not okay. That's why the unconscious bias, sometimes when we going through, like why a race going through certain sort of like generational trauma, and this is something we need to making peace with, right? It's not just like, hey, we're against each other, we like dismiss or not acknowledging what the damage we have done, right? So sometimes this expression is purely asking an acknowledgement, not something, for example, I want to prove who's right, who's wrong, because it is past, right? But we do carry that in our DNA in a lot of way. So I think that's just one thing I want to really put it out there. And like when you dealing with this situation, no matter you're in the privilege or you're the one in the party of being discriminated or racism, and sometimes I feel like we just really need to standing up for who we are, and also like bring awareness, not like necessarily bring a fight or argument. It's just purely like we all shared equal right, but like historically, like we are not the same, right? We're not equal. For example, like I think I shared a lot of story with that. But my own experiences here, I think it's in like obvious way. Like for example, I remember when I was in Christchurch, and I was walking on the street, and people will just say, "Hey, like fucking Asian," right? So I don't think any white people were going through this. So it's only, and also I think, and there's another thing I wanna share little things here as well. Like for example, if a white people foreigner, for example, foreigners like gonna come to China, I think that would be totally different, like sort of like a treatment, because I think a lot of Chinese culture is actually kind of like worship the Western, right? And so when like a white people coming to Chinese culture, you will be worshipped and you won't be discriminated, and you will be like treated as the best guest ever in the world. And of course, this is a generalization as well, but I think that's what I feel and experiences back home. So that's what I'm saying, like you will have totally treatment, and also like as an Asian, like how we raised up and how we, I also feel like there's another thing in here as well, like we all in some shape or form are a product of our culture, right? So no matter how many things or you traveled, and there's still like a deep sense of like who you are. So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes the stereotype is actually truth in a way. Of course, it cannot like, for example, Chinese people all like that. It's not everybody, but there's some truth in this kind of stereotype, right? And also, I think the other day I was talking with also one of my friend, and she was, oh, okay, Chinese people are just so rude, or talking really, really loud. And I was like, do you know why? And yes, there might be some judgment in it. There might be, I think just purely because they don't know, right? But I was like, I just kind of like just explain why. Because in China, right, so everybody is a really crowded place. It's not like New Zealand. They have like much more space. And for example, in the bus, it's really crowded and there's no space and everybody's talking. And if you want to be heard, you have to shout, you have to yell. So sometimes people will listen to Chinese people talking. It was like, are they arguing? And they're not really quiet. And so therefore they're rude, right? So I have been kind of considered rude in a lot of way in New Zealand because the way I was. So I've learned a lot of kind of like, the social manners is totally different in here. I like it, but also in a sort of like really make me feel like a little bit fake in a lot of way, right? It's like the fake niceness and friendliness. Of course, I'm not saying everybody for sure. But yeah, it's just that like a way of like people couldn't see the difference. Like sometimes I feel like why we living in different culture, different race, and having different like the background, how we live, and like our like point of view and work view as well. So this is not for against each other. It's really like asking us to having that like sort of like acceptance, like no matter what race you're in, but also some like race do experiencing more discrimination and racism than others, right? And even at work, like I sometimes experiencing subtle, like when I remember when I first arrived in New Zealand, and not first arrived, even like after 2 or 3 years, I'm still practicing my English. And at work, like my boss would say, hey, oh, do you know how to write email? Or do you know how to make community connection because, your English? And I've witnessed a lot of people from maybe not speaking this language and also being questioned or like discriminated in a very subtle way in office as well. So it's not some, and also like in the end, I have to, at the beginning, I really feel like hurtful in a lot of way. And until I finally find my voice, I was, hey, there's certain behavior is not okay. I'm not trying to against you in a lot of way, but I have to bring awareness. Like when you say certain things to another race who going through a lot of trauma, you have to be like careful, cautious, because you might expose them to a really deep sense of hurt. You know what I mean? But also I think now, like when people say, hey, Chinese people, or like having a racist behavior towards me, and I will shut off, I will literally say, hey, this is not okay, this is racism, I will call you out. And there's also another subtle way as well. Like for example, you cannot pinpoint it, but you can definitely feel it. For example, if you're a white male, right? And then you will get definitely much more opportunities and gravity and in your career, in your fame, in your income. And that's just a fact. I don't need to give you more evidence about that. As an Asian woman, like especially when your English is not very good, and when even though I was really qualified back home, I have really great working experiences and I can be really skillful like worker here, but I couldn't, like you won't be recognized. And yeah, so basically after the 7 years being in New Zealand, I really trying my best and to kind of find a way and to stay or whatever. And even in the immigration as well, it's like there's a lot of things against people with Chinese passport, right? So I won't dive more deeper into that, but I think a lot of people were going through this as well. So I think basically, and also I remember, and then one time, I think, what was that? Like, I think I was just kind of purely like, I was like solving some problems in my workplace, and I sent an email to people, and then like, my boss just reply me and say, oh, like we're using MUM, not MOM. And I think you might feel like this is a little things. And that moment, I really feel like that's a discrimination as well. So you want correcting people who's English speaker this, right? And there's like a lot of like energy going on over there. Of course, I feel like I've overcome a lot of like not getting defensive, offensive with this, even though no matter this discrimination is true or not. And it's just kind of like, okay, like, but I won't just kind of like go silent. So kind of before I was shrinking, I was, oh, maybe, and really having a deep sense of like, okay, my English is not good enough and everything is not good enough. And you really want to try so hard to prove yourself. And I've seen that in the workplace as well. Like, for example, like my coworkers maybe from somewhere else, and they will really trying so hard to prove themselves. But when people who in the privilege, and they don't need to go through these experiences. Like before, I might go into in a victim saying, hey, this is not fair, and this is like, but I don't think we need to get into that space. I just feel like unconscious bias is definitely exist. And I think when people really going through as a race and going through all the discrimination, all the like trauma they had, I think I just now remember like what I wrote in the post, and I was talking about like why the racism like connecting with the ancestral healing. Like in shamanic practice, we're talking about like when your ancestor going through, for example, wars and even like certain party against each other, that memory sometimes restore in our DNA. Not everybody will activating it, but certain people will remember and have really strong sense of it. And that's when one of the person has to be kind of like releasing this trauma or breaking through the cycle in a lot of way. So I think I was just writing because, Chinese people, I was kind of like feel really, really sad because, like our ancestors have like 5,000 years history, more than even that. There's a lot ancient wisdom, spiritual practice in the history, in the country itself. But however, and the civilization coming through, and also now the Chinese government taking over, and we lost all of that, and it become materialism. What we learned from people who are trying to colonize us, right? And it's not saying, hey, like, okay, all white culture, white Western culture are bad or in that way, but that invasion, that taking away, or also, for example, if you see China, and you will see they're trying to prove themselves, impress themselves, and to prove their worth because they are bullied or they're discriminated when they doesn't have a gun, when they are economically not strong enough, they couldn't defend themselves. They're really, really strong. The anger and then the helplessness. Now we need to prove ourselves like we are strong. Now, yes, I think in a way they prove themselves, but not in a really pleasant way, in a lot of sense. But yeah, so I think that's where the trauma coming from, right? So you're always trying to prove yourself. I think I can see myself. I feel like maybe a lot of Asian people can, or Chinese people can resonate as well. You have to prove your worth. But when you're back home, probably not, because everybody values hardworking, everybody values like, your talent. But here, there's like a massive like tall poppy syndrome here as well. I'm not sure people were experiencing that or not. Of course, I think that's also based on personal experiences as well. But yeah, I think that's what I'm just saying. Like when you're going through like as a race, for example, spiritually, we incarnate in this race, you choose in this race, and you carry that trauma. So sometimes, like I said, it's not really get into the victim like story, but really, okay, what is the antidote for this, right? So for me, it's like when I finally realize, for example, at the moment when I'm really going through discrimination, like obvious way or subtle way, and I go like really like disheartened in a lot of way. I feel, oh, things not fair, and all the sad and negative feelings and will coming out of it. But I feel like I'm hopeless because I couldn't change this until I finally standing up saying, hey, this is not okay. I finally kind of like, reported back to the top saying, like, I've been experiencing this and this is not okay. And what I want is change. Is not saying, hey, like I want to making anyone in trouble. I just want to really educate people saying, hey, there's certain race do going through certain experiences and all they're going through is valid. And it's not asking to hate or to divide in any other way. It's really asking for unite, acknowledge other people's pain. Because when you're not able to acknowledging the other party's pain, there's no peace will made between the race. You know what I mean? So I think that's basically one thing I want to talk about. And also another like side story about this. So I think I do remember one time I went to like a sort of like a shamanic training kind of thing. Like there's a shaman and he was talking about the channeling he had. And he basically saying, hey, like we all are consciousness and star beings from another planet or something like that. And then because we're different species and we kind of like having a star war or something like that. And yeah, and then basically, and Earth is a planet. They really want to make peace, the universal peace, and for all the star species, and then like we choosing incarnate as a human, like trying to see, hey, this can make different races make peace and unite with each other. And so like now you are the same species, so you don't need to against each other. You need to unite, right? But unfortunately, when you see this, we still we carry that, like if that's true, I'm not sure it's true or not, no one can verify that. If that is true, and still we can see like how we're against each other and how we, even though we're in the same species, even though maybe we have different like body colors and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the whole episode, I really want to bring awareness to say, yeah, sometimes, yeah, as a race, we do have certain behavior. We are all product of a culture, but also be respectful and also be sensitive about maybe another race going through a lot of trauma. They need acknowledgement. They need the validation of the pain. But of course, the biggest thing is the change. When you're aware of like your behavior might impact people's life and really causing a lot, because I think that's something like I feel like it can be a really big thing. For example, if some children, like for example, I knew some people raised up in New Zealand environment, because they're so totally different. Most people, majority people are white, right? And then as an Asian, it's easy get to bullied. And I've seen a lot of people that childhood trauma like really imprint in their body. And it cannot just say, hey, we're all the same, like we're all one. You cannot just bypass that, right? So there's acknowledgement of the pain is the start of the peace, right? So yeah, so I think that's basically what I'm gonna talking about, and I hopefully really bring some awareness, and I hope you enjoy this story as well. And thank you very much.